Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm sharing a story that you might have actually lived through yourself, and trust me, it's a love story. Are you ready? Let's go! She was 64 years old, completely alone, and had not felt a man's warmth in over a decade until the night a soaking, wet 27-year-old fisherman knocked on her lighthouse door. What he whispered to her that stormy night in Maine was a secret so deeply personal that even his own mother had never heard it, and it changed everything for both of them. Okay, girls, sit down because I need to tell you something I came across recently, and I have not been able to stop thinking about it since the moment I heard it. This is the kind of story that makes you believe that life does not end at 60. Not even close. Her name was Margaret. Margaret Ellen Collins, 64 years old, living alone in a lighthouse on the rocky coast of Maine. Now, before you picture some sad, forgotten woman, let me paint the real picture for you. Margaret was sharp, strong, and deeply intentional about her solitude. She had been married once, for 22 years, to a good man named Robert who passed away from a heart condition when she was 51. After that, she made a quiet decision. She would live on her own terms. She took the lighthouse keeper position that opened up in a small coastal town called Harpswell, packed 2 suitcases, and never looked back. That was 13 years ago. She had her books, her morning coffee on the rocks, her evening walks along the shore, and the kind of peace that most people spend their whole lives searching for. She was not unhappy, but she was alone. And there is a difference between choosing solitude and forgetting what it feels like to truly be seen by another person. Now, girls, this is where the story gets interesting, so stay with me. Every single evening, without fail, a small fishing boat would dock near the base of the lighthouse. Margaret had noticed it for months, but never thought much of it. Fishermen came and went along that coastline, but this one always came at the same time, right at sunset, and he always sat quietly in his boat for a few minutes before heading back toward the harbor. One evening, out of pure curiosity, Margaret walked down to the dock. And that is when she saw him up close for the first time. His name was Noah James Callahan, 27 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends from the salt air, hands that were rough from years of work, and eyes that carried something Margaret could only describe as a very old sadness inside a very young face. She called out to him, just a simple hello. And the way he looked up at her, girls, she told the person who shared this story that it was like he had been waiting for someone to notice him for a very long time. They started talking that evening, just small things at first. The weather, the tides, the best spots along the coast. But Margaret noticed something right away. Noah never talked about himself. Not his family, not his past, not his plans. Every time the conversation drifted toward him personally, he would smile quietly and redirect. Margaret was a woman who had spent decades learning how to read the sea. She knew how to recognize something moving beneath the surface. Weeks passed. Noah docked his boat every evening. Sometimes they talked for 10 minutes, sometimes for an hour. Margaret began to look forward to that time in a way she had not looked forward to anything in years. She started making 2 cups of coffee instead of 1 and bringing them down to the dock. Noah always accepted without a word, just that quiet smile that she could not quite figure out. One evening in late October, a storm rolled in faster than anyone expected. The sky turned the color of an old bruise, and the wind came off the water like something angry. Margaret was inside when she heard the knock on the lighthouse door. She opened it, and there was Noah, completely soaking wet, his jacket torn at the shoulder, his boat barely secured to the dock below. She pulled him inside without even thinking about it, got him dry clothes from a box of Robert's old things she had never thrown away, made hot soup, and as they sat together at her small kitchen table with the storm shaking the windows, something shifted between them. The warmth of the room, the sound of the rain, the years of quiet conversations finally catching up to the moment. Noah looked at her across the table, and Margaret saw something in his face that she had not seen before. He looked like he was about to finally say something true. And girls, what he told her that night changed everything. Noah had been coming to that lighthouse every evening for one reason. His grandmother had kept that exact lighthouse for 30 years before Margaret arrived. She had passed away 2 years before Noah came back to Maine. He had grown up on the water with her, learned everything he knew from her, and after she was gone, he did not know how to carry that grief. So every evening he would dock his boat at the place where she had spent her life and just sit with the feeling of her memory. He had never told anyone, not his father, not his friends, not a single soul, because he was afraid that if he said it out loud, the grief would become too large to hold. Margaret sat very still when he finished. And then she did something that surprised them both. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, and she said, "Your grandmother sat at the same table, Noah. I found her handwriting in the margins of the logbooks when I first arrived. I never knew who she was, but I always felt like the lighthouse was already full of someone's love when I moved in." Noah broke down completely. And Margaret held that young man the way she imagined his grandmother would have wanted someone to hold him. After that night, everything was different. Noah still came every evening, but now he came to the door. They cooked dinner together. He told her stories about his grandmother, and she told him stories about Robert. They laughed more than either of them had laughed in years. The people in town noticed. Some of them whispered. A 27-year-old spending his evenings with a 64-year-old lighthouse keeper. But neither of them cared even a little bit. What they had built together in that lighthouse was something that most people never find regardless of age. It was the feeling of being completely known by another person, of having your grief witnessed and your presence valued, of waking up and knowing that someone out there is thinking about you. By the following spring, Noah had moved his few belongings into the lighthouse, not romantically in the way some of you might be thinking, but as a companion, as a partner in the truest sense of the word. Two people who had both been profoundly alone and who had found in each other something neither one had a name for but both recognized immediately as necessary. Margaret said later in the account, "I came across that she had not been looking for anyone. She had made her peace with solitude. But life," she said, "has a way of sending you exactly what you need in exactly the form you would never expect." Girls, I think about Margaret and Noah a lot. I think about the way she walked down to that dock out of simple curiosity one evening and how that single small act of reaching out opened an entire chapter of her life she thought was already finished. 64 years old, standing on a rocky shore in Maine. And the most meaningful connection of her later life was waiting right there at the end of her own dock. What gets me every single time is this. Margaret was not waiting for love. She was not hoping for it or trying to manufacture it. She had genuinely made her peace, and maybe that is exactly why it found her. Because she was no longer holding on so tightly to the idea of what love was supposed to look like. She let it arrive in its own form, and it arrived as a grieving young man with salt in his hair and an old sadness in his eyes, sitting quietly in a boat at sunset. If that does not make you believe that life still has surprises left for you, no matter how many years are behind you, I honestly do not know what will. If this story moved you even a little bit, I want you to know that this is exactly why I keep coming back here to share these things with you. Because somewhere out there, someone is sitting alone right now believing that their chapter is finished. And stories like Margaret and Noah exist to remind us that it is not. If you know someone who needs to hear something like this today, please share this with them. It might be exactly what they need. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this one, make sure you are subscribed and have your notifications turned on because I find these stories and I bring them straight to you. I will see you in the next one, girls. Do not go anywhere.